Here's why you should never go camping without a weapon. 19-year-old Olga Moskalivyova was camping near a river in Russia with her stepfather Igor when a mother bear attacked them. Seconds later, the 500-pound brown bear.
Things humans were never meant to see. A man was struck by lightning, and this is the amazing pattern that it left. I bet you've never seen this before. This is how a clam walks. It sticks out its body and pushes itself forward. This is what chairlifts looked like in the 60s. There was no safety bar, so you had to be careful not to move at all. This giant fiery pit looks like it's from another planet, but it actually exists here on Earth, and it has been burning for more than 60 years straight. This is what movie and TV shows look like after special effects are added, and this is what they look like before.
Here's some random facts that will mess with the way you see the world. Astronaut means star sailor. Astro meaning star and not meaning sailor. That is such a cool name. High heels were originally made for butchers so they wouldn't get blood on the bottom of their shoes. The first ever webcam was created to check on a coffee pot just to make sure it didn't catch on fire. In Switzerland, it's illegal to own just one guinea pig. You need at least 2 or more. I think it's because they get depressed if they're alone. I'm not even joking. Australia is wider than the moon. How does that work? The Eiffel Tower is taller in the summer. This is because metal expands when it gets hot, right? A jiffy is an actual unit of time. It's 1/1000th of a second. In Japan, there's over 200 flavors of Kit Kats. What? I didn't know that there were 200 flavors, period. Queen Elizabeth was a trained mechanic in the military. That's a baller move, though. Become a mechanic and then a queen. Do you know the only letter that doesn't appear in a U.S. state name? I'll give you 3 seconds. Ready? 3, 2, 1. The letter Q.
These are the most rare people to ever exist. Up first is Samson Burns. He's had a genetic disease since birth, which makes him look a lot older than he is. And people who have this disease, their life expectancy is only 15 years. Samson Burns was known for his motivational speeches and his amazing fight with the disease. He lived until he was 17, which baffled people because the life expectancy for this disease was only 15 years. Up next is Paul Carrison. Paul Carrison was known worldwide for his bluish skin, which was caused by a disease which changes the color of the skin and the organs. But he sadly passed away a few years ago for reasons unrelated to his illness.
Do you guys remember the case of Lacy Fletcher, the woman who melted into her couch? Well, the people responsible for this have been sentenced. But let me remind you guys a little bit about 36-year-old Lacy. In 2022, she was found deceased on her family's couch, and apparently she sat there for 12 years without moving. So how exactly does that happen? Well, Lacy had severe autism and she was nonverbal, so she solely depended on her parents as her caregiver. But after years of neglect, she weighed less than 100 pounds. She was found covered in maggots at her own waist. And again, this is how the couch looked like when they found Lacy deceased. Lacy's cause of death was acute medical neglect, and ultimately her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, were each sentenced this month to 40 years, but will only be serving 20 years in prison. Now, what's outrageous is that her parents, who went from this to this, testified that their daughter refused any medical attention. How can someone who couldn't communicate and completely relied on them refuse medical attention? A 36-year-old weighing less than 100 pounds. Let that sink in. This tragedy could have been prevented. There is no excuse.
Common things you never knew the real purpose of. Part 7. First off, you know that drawer underneath your oven where most people put their pots and pans? Well, the real reason that it's there is, for example, if you're having guests over and they're late, you can put your food in there and it'll keep it warm. If you've ever been confused on how much pasta you should cook for just yourself to eat, well, that hole in the middle of a spaghetti spoon isn't actually for draining water. It's for putting uncooked pasta through it so you get the perfect serving for one person. Have you ever wondered why there's a little button on your seatbelt? It's actually to stop the buckle from going past it, so it'll always be in the right spot when you go to buckle it up. Those little buttons on your jeans aren't totally useless. They're called rivets. Rivets are placed in areas on jeans that receive the most wear and tear stress, so they actually help you prevent your jeans from ripping apart at the seams. Many people think this dot on the back of an iPhone is for flash, but it's actually a microphone used for recording when using the back camera. The tags on bread packages come in 5 different colors, representing 5 of the 7 different days of the week. And here's what each one equates to. And the reason they don't have Wednesday or Sunday is because most shops don't get deliveries on these days. And the hole on the bottom of a lock isn't actually to pick it. It's meant to drain any captured liquid to prevent it from rusting.
Normal looking videos with disturbing backstories, Part 1. In this home video on Thanksgiving Day 1990 is a father recording his son Jeffrey, who can be seen talking to his father and flipping through a magazine.
Well, I've been surviving mostly on McDonald's food. It's just so much easier just to pop into the restaurant. But yeah, like I've said before, it gets too expensive and it does. I have to start eating at home more.
But what nobody knew at the time is the man in the video, Jeffrey Dahmer, had already unalived 7 of his victims and later became one of the biggest serial killers in history.
Crazy facts about things in our world. Muhammad is the most popular name worldwide. A teaspoon of a neutron star weighs 10 million tons. The Great Wall of China takes 18 months to walk. The human body is made up of 60% water.
Alright guys, let's talk about Slender Man. Slender Man is a 7-foot tall humanoid creature that has no face and is known for kidnapping children and brainwashing older people into being his little servants. He's mainly found out in the woods and you'll rarely ever see him outside of the woods. He's also known to be around kids' playgrounds, lurking in the woods just waiting for them. If one of them happens to wander off into the woods, he snatches them up and they're never seen again. What's very disturbing about Slender Man is he will target his victims for years and drive them to insanity with paranoia. One way to know if he's nearby is if your electronic devices are having malfunctions. For example, if your phone turns off randomly or if the radio station's giving a lot of static. Back to the stalking though, you can see him right here in the background waiting for those kids. Some of them are even around him, and you can see all of his other arms coming out from behind him. Usually when he grabs the victim, he will vanish with them very quickly and you'll find them impaled on a tree with all of their organs missing. And to this day, nobody knows what he truly does with his victims or the organs.
Imagine finding out that the pastor from your church did this. On August 1975, 8-year-old Gretchen Harrington was walking to Bible study in Pennsylvania, but she never made it. Gretchen's father became extremely worried when she was nowhere to be found. And that's when Pastor David Zantra called police to report Gretchen missing. When investigators interviewed the pastor, he was providing details of what Gretchen was wearing that day, even though she never made it to the church. So how did he know? The pastor denied knowing anything about Gretchen's disappearance, and 2 months later, her skeletal remains were found at a nearby creek. Gretchen's cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. But 50 years later, on January of this year, police interviewed a woman who was friends with the pastor's daughter in the 70s and discovered something from her diary entry around that time. The little girl at the time explains in her diary that the pastor used to touch her when she slept over his daughter's house. The pastor, who's now 83 years old, moved to Georgia after Gretchen's murder, and when police came to arrest him, he admitted to everything. He said that on that morning of 1975, he saw Gretchen walking to Bible study, so he offered to give her a ride, but instead of taking her to the church, he took her to a wooded area and told her to take off her clothes, and when she said no, that's when he took her life.
This is maybe the scariest urban legend I've ever heard, and it ended up being true. Back in the 1970s, there was this terrifying fun house in Long Beach, California called The Laugh in the Dark. And there was always this urban legend that all the mannequins inside were fake, except for one. Also, mind you, this is what this week's episode is about, so if you don't want spoilers, just listen to the episode. This urban legend came to be because there was one mannequin inside that just looked wrong. All of the other ones looked fake, but this one in particular looked way too human. And a bunch of the kids also said the area that the mannequin was in just smelled really, really bad. So a few years go by, and one day a film crew comes in and is using Laugh in the Dark for a film set. The director's lining up a shot, and he just doesn't like the way this one mannequin looks in frame. So he goes over to a crew member and he's like, hey, can you just move this out of the shot? So the crew member goes over and starts moving the mannequin when its arm pops off. And inside of the mannequin's arm is human bone. The kids had been totally right. The mannequin was a mummified body. There's so much more to this story, like who the person was and how they got there, and I talk about the whole thing this week on the episode.
Scary facts that will ruin your day. Do you ever wake up around 3 a.m. for no apparent reason? They say that if you wake up around 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. for no reason, that there's a 90% chance something was staring at you.
I was tagged in this and people want to know if it's true or false. This is false, this is rubbish. But let me give you a fact, yeah? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, whoever wakes up at night, suddenly wakes up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, he should say this dua, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. To all this dua here, you can do a screenshot so you can know what to say. You can say it English or Arabic, yeah? Whoever does that, Allah will forgive his sins. And the Prophet ﷺ in another narration says, if he says this dua and does wudu and prays to Allah, Allah will accept his prayer. In other words, your dua is accepted, everything is accepted. Allah woke you up at that time for a reason. Allahu Akbar. Take opportunity of it.
Mysteries that still can't be explained. This is a lost Egyptian city found by divers in the early 2000s, and they were able to retrieve giant statues and artifacts from it. But until this day, scientists have no idea how the city ended up in the middle of the ocean. And this is the plain of jars located in Laos. And like the name suggests, there's around a few thousand jars in the ground. Each of them are around 10 feet tall, and scientists have found no real purpose for it. What do you guys think they were used for?
This 6-year-old boy was forced by his father to run on a treadmill, then he passed away. On April 2nd, 2021, 6-year-old Corey Mitchell was taken to the hospital by his father, 31-year-old Christopher Greger, after he began experiencing shortness of breath and nausea. Corey was immediately taken for a CT scan where he began having seizures and passed away shortly after. Then, disturbing surveillance footage from Christopher's apartment gym was found, which I'm going to warn you, it's really hard to watch. Corey is seen being forced by his father to run on this treadmill at a really high speed. Then you see Corey fall 6 times on his face, and Christopher picks him up by the shirt and puts him back on the treadmill. And then at one point, Christopher is also seen biting Corey's head. Almost 2 weeks after this incident, Corey passed away, and the autopsy showed that this little boy had various injuries on his chest, abdomen, heart, and liver, showing that he was being abused for some time. Corey's mother, who shared joint custody with Christopher, also reported the abuse more than 100 times in 18 months, but nothing was done. Then investigators found a handful of suspicious Google searches on Christopher's phone about bruises, his car being tracked, and being arrested. Christopher is currently being held without bond, and if convicted, he faces life in prison.
Let's talk about Jeff the Killer. By the way, this is a creepypasta. He was a 13-year-old boy who had just moved to a new town with his mother and father. And he was already being bullied a lot in horrible ways that I can't even say on this video. One day at a party, the bullying got a little too out of hand. They disfigured him, lighting him on fire and throwing bleach on his face. He woke up in the hospital with his head wrapped in bandages. His eyelids were burnt off. When he took off the bandages, he noticed his face was all leathery and pale. He started laughing uncontrollably, and doctors just played it off as, oh, maybe it's the medicine we gave him, making him a little loopy. He started saying he loved his new face, and he eventually carved a permanent smile in his mouth because mentally he was broken. He was no longer that nice little 13-year-old boy. That's when he decided to get revenge on the bullies, taking them out one by one. This watermelon's good. He even took his family's life. What did they do to you, bro? What did they do? Now it's stated that he comes after anyone who stays up late. This was the last photo someone took of him before he got them. This picture is supposedly cursed.
Have you guys heard of the man who murdered his coworker in the Walgreens break room? On June 11th, 2022, 28-year-old Joshua Johnson murdered his coworker, 17-year-old Riley Whitelaw, in a Walgreens employee break room in Colorado. Riley was discovered in a pool of blood by her manager after she never returned from her break. Joshua attempted to make advances on Riley in the past, and she repeatedly told managers that he made her feel uncomfortable. Riley even asked her managers to change her work shift so she can avoid Joshua, but when she requested additional hours, she was made aware that overtime would mean that her and Joshua may cross paths. 3 months before her murder, Riley's boyfriend began working at the same Walgreens, which apparently made Joshua jealous. On the day that Riley was attacked, a customer heard a woman screaming and the sound of very loud slamming. Surveillance footage also caught Joshua stacking bins in front of the camera so that it can block the view before attacking Riley. He was then found by police walking on the street with scratches all over his body.
If you're alone right now, don't watch this video. In the winter of 2018, a man who was living alone in the mountains wakes up to find a red ball sitting on his front yard. He assumed the only neighbor he had must have kids, and so he kicks the ball over the fence, goes inside, doesn't think anything of it. That night, he wakes up to the sound of kids laughing outside of his window. He goes outside to check on them because it's the middle of the night, and there's no kids anywhere, but that red ball is back on his property. So he picks it up, brings it in his house, and goes back to bed. The next morning, he goes over to his neighbor's house to let them know that their kids were out in his yard in the middle of the night. But it turns out his neighbor is just some old man who lives alone, and there aren't any kids anywhere in the area. That night, he wakes up again to the sound of kids on his property, and when he looks outside, there's no kids, but that red ball is back on his property. Panicked, he runs downstairs to make sure the one he brought in is still inside, and it's gone. He checked every window and door, and everything was still locked. It didn't make any sense. He decides to look out the window one more time, and off in the distance is some weird, stiff figure watching him.
These are videos you can never watch at night. We all know how there's some videos where you just can't watch them at night because they're that scary. Well, in this series, I'll be showing you all of those videos. So, be ready to get terrified.
Who are you? Please let me in. Huh? Please help me. What? What's wrong with you? It is me. What? It took my daughter.
Well, I know I'm not sleeping after watching that video. This video has been going viral recently and nobody knows the origins of it. It shows what appears to be a ghostly woman standing outside of some man's window at night. And she says something took her daughter and did this to her. But nobody knows what that is. The man who uploaded the video hasn't updated anybody on if he's seen her again, or if he's okay, leaving people to worry about him. But I can't imagine looking out my window at night and seeing this.
If you're ever walking and hear a sound behind you, look up, for it might be the Gashadokuru. The Gashadokuru are skeleton giants who walk around in the middle of the night. If they see a human, they will quietly walk up behind them, bite off their head, and drink their spraying blood. Soldiers that die on the field and people that die of starvation usually do not have their final rites read. In Japanese culture, that means that their soul cannot pass on and they're reborn as a hungry ghost. When the bones of hundreds of those souls gather together, they become the skeleton monster known as Gashadokuru. If you're a fan of monsters, scary stories, and lore, please support this channel. Thank you guys.
This photo is of the Cincinnati crawler. It was taken by a family who caught him in their home in 1974, but he escaped shortly afterwards. So in 1974, the Johnson family in Cincinnati noticed a couple weird things happening in their home. The 14-year-old daughter, Claire, would complain about seeing glowing eyes outside of her window at night. And then one night, the youngest son, Timmy, was laying in bed in the dark when he felt the family dog jump up onto his bed. But when he went to go pet it, it was not the dog. It was the crawler, who police still believe was responsible for the disappearance of 4 other boys in the area. Some believe that he was an escaped convict, while others actually believe that he was the victim of human experiments happening in the area that may have been conducted by the family's dad. Claire snapped this photo of him before he escaped, but he was never found since.
The darkest YouTube cults of all time. This cult is called Blood Over Intent, and this is how I snuck in. By the way, I'm going back to blonde hair. First, let's go over what happened. I began searching the internet for Discord servers that had this cult inside of them. Came across some small ones and joined, expecting nothing to happen. A couple hours later, I get a message from a grandmaster of cultists. He then asked me if I want to be a part of the cult or if I'm just investigating it. I then say looking to join somehow. He then continues to warn me about the dangers of blood magic. Here is where things become interesting. He says blood over intent is a real thing. The problem with it is what it costs. By using your own blood, you agree to lose everything you care about. I was 9 years old when I did it my first and last time. What I cared most about were my pets. Not one of them survived. One even died from worms blowing out her belly. I then asked him if his spells have ever harmed humans. He then goes on to say, my spell at 9 years old decimated a family. This is definitely creepy, but like and follow, and I'm gonna try and sneak into some more cults.
This home was previously owned by Britney Spears. On a recent podcast called We Need to Talk About Britney, Britney's former makeup artist joined the conversation. She said that while Britney was living in this home, she had some type of spiritual transformation, and she invited someone over who claimed to be a spiritual healer. But after the healer left, something didn't feel right to her. Britney said she thought the healer had opened some type of portal, and she claimed that there were evil spirits in her house trying to push her down the stairs. The situation must have scared her pretty badly because she left the home immediately when it happened and never returned. She then sold the house with everything inside to Britney Murphy. And as many of you probably already know, Britney Murphy died in that house under very suspicious circumstances, and her husband died 5 months after her in the same room that Britney died in. Take a listen.
It was so bad that she left. She went to the Casa Del Mar Hotel to stay there and never went back to the house again. She put her house on the market, and guess who bought that house? Who? And died in it. Britney Murphy.
This is a photo of Mike Tyson shaking hands with Dale Hausner, a known serial killer in Phoenix, Arizona who killed 8 people. Mike Tyson did not know that at the time. He thought he was a sports writer. Police then showed up to Mike's gym and let him know you just shook hands with a serial killer. Mike Tyson had literally no idea. The murders Hausner committed happened from May 2005 all the way up to August 2006. They were described as playing real-life Grand Theft Auto. They would shoot at random pedestrians just walking by and animals, and they would also just set random things on fire and burn it down. This man committed 80 felonies. I think there are only like 88 possible felonies you can get. This dude almost hit 100% completion on that. Now, this photo behind me was taken just a few days before Hausner was caught. Then when Mike Tyson was interviewed by the police about Hausner, he was like, yeah, seems like a nice guy, smaller stature, completely oblivious to the fact that he murdered 8 people. Super scary to think that people were just walking randomly in the street and getting shot by this guy right here. Glad that's over. Glad he's caught. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.